Okay, welcome to the live carve. Carving an eater. Okay. How's it going, guys? Okay, good. Hi, everybody. I have a list of topics that you all requested I do some talking about, and so I thought I'd start addressing those. I guess the first one to talk about, hi from Kosovo. Hi, Nico. I guess the first one I want to talk about is speed. I felt like when I first started carving, I was chasing speed, and I was chasing speed by trying to make my movements fast. And that didn't work very well. And instead, I found that it works better to have a plan, to stick to the plan, to have a process, to stick to the process, because that helps you walk away when it's time to walk away. And that really, the ability to walk away and the ability to sort of know what your next move is going to be at all times was much more effective, I found, than simply trying to speed up my actual movements, not to mention the fact that it's more safe. It's just more effective. And then gradually I sort of figured out which parts of my spoon designs were eating up a lot of time, what were the parts I was struggling with. And I slowly shifted my designs over time to take that into account, take advantage of the things that were easy to do as opposed to the things that were tricky to do, and marry that with the functionality that I was searching for. So what you see in my current work is kind of the ultimate combination of those two things, of having a simple design that is fast to carve and that works supremely well. You can't have one without the other. I would always choose functionality over something being easy to carve. But hi everyone again. But I do think that keeping in mind, what things are easy to carve versus difficult to carve is a really important factor to speed, as is having a game plan of, carve this, then this, then this, then this, then this. I have my process. And for those of you in the Virtual Apprenticeship Challenge, we're going to go over that process this coming week. But I think just having a process is more important than having, than sort of like copying what somebody does. It's having a process that you think through and that allows you to sort of analyze, okay, what if I did this differently? What if I did this differently? What if I tried doing this before I did this? That's the sort of thinking I want to encourage. Nice. You're from Kosovo. What's your first name? So, okay, now I'm going through other topics. If you guys have topics that you want me to talk about, feel free. I'm going to put down the spoon for a second and talk about stretching. Stretching, so important. I don't often stretch right before I carve. Often I'll be stretching throughout the day. But this, you can hear a little crack already. Claret, nice to have you here. And then for some reason, I was always taught to go like this. You can feel it in the muscles on your forearm. You can feel it's different than if you only do the one. Doing both is different, as is doing three. So I tend to walk up and then walk my way down. But really, it's in these multiples that I find the most effectiveness. Now notice, this is my offhand. This is the hand that's holding the spoon, not the hand that's holding the knife. But it also needs stretching because it's doing a lot of the work. So make sure you're stretching both forearms. My thumb doesn't usually need quite as much. It's usually these muscles in here. Oh, that feels good. And this is really important. One of the things I talk about, though, in the post I did on my feed this last week about stretching is that there's no substitute for just doing less. So if you are thinking you might be overdoing it, do less. You don't want to get tennis elbow. You don't want to get, you don't want to get your body pushed to the point where it's really starting to hurt. Now, you can do this, but honestly, these muscles aren't the ones that get worked. The other ones that sometimes get worked is right along here. And the best thing for that, for me, is doing this. You can reach up behind you and reach your fingers together, but if you can't do that, doing this is just as effective, and you'll find that that stretches right along there and really goes a long way. Ah, there we go. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Cynthia. All right. This side doesn't really need stretching because it's not the side using the axe. Okay. Good. For those of you who don't know, I have a list down here, and I'm going through the list. I'm going to talk about things. I'm trying to make sure I talk about the things that you want me to talk about as I get to them. So, here's an important thing. Within the billet of wood, before this little hump that I'm creating distracts you too much, the deepest part of the spoon, of that V that I created, is right there. Now notice that that deepest part does not line up with the widest part. The widest part is up where this finger and this finger are. That's really important because it means that when you hit this grain change that happens right here, where all of a sudden you need to start carving in the other direction, and you're carving the rim around, like I did right here. Right here, the grain changes, and by the time, oh, I get this closer. Hold on, bear with me. Gotta lower the old legs. Woo! Lowering the legs. There we go. That's really close. Okay, so by the time you get to here, and the grain changes, you're heading downhill that way. And so you can just tip the knife a little bit more that way and keep going down all the way to the neck. You were amazed to see the reduction in flexibility in your carving hand. Can't get a right angle between your fingers and back of your hand. Fingers and back of your hand anymore? Fingers back. Oh, I see. Like when you were holding, like when you were doing that. Yeah. It's true. It's true. It takes a beating, and you got to make sure you do both of them. So that's, as far as getting the crank to behave and not getting stuck on the rim, doing that, shoving the whole form up within the V. So I start off by making a V, and I'm not showing you here because I'm not doing any axing, but I make a shallow V, and then I draw my shape on, and I make sure that the deepest part of the V is down here, closer to the neck, and it doesn't line up with the widest part. That's the most important thing I can teach you for not getting stuck down in that V there. So my process for speed is always the same. I always rough out around the outline, and then I trim the top shape to get the top bowl profile that I'm looking for. This is my moment to really kind of establish the angles and the curvature that I want to see going forward, right? And I establish it, so the thing to pay attention to is this line right here, not this hump of material. And So the thing to pay attention to is this line that's created on the top here. And the reason I carved that line first is because there's these axe marks that need to be eliminated, right? I need to get a clean edge. See how there's a clean edge that runs right around the edge? These axe marks that are in there do not extend all the way to the edge because I've gotten underneath them with the carving. So I do that first, and this is also my moment to pay attention to whether there's a twist or not. Because if there's a twist between the way the spoon was and the way the handle is, this is your moment right here when you're defining the top form. This is your moment to undo that twist. And usually you undo the twist by lowering the rim on whichever side is the high side of the twist. Because the other option is to change the angle of the handle, but that means that you need to change all four sides. Whereas if you just lower one side or the other of the tip of the spoon bowl, that has the same effect. So I do the top of the bowl first. Now notice I'm not trying to get anything totally perfect. I'm just trying to establish that swoop the way I want it. And now that I have that the way I want it, I'll do the back of the bowl. Now on other videos I break down sort of what's happening with my hands, so I'm not going to get into that too much, and instead I'm going to focus on this list I have from people. So hey chat, if you have questions in that vein, feel free to shoot them at me. So let's see, we did twist, transition, sourcing wood. Let's talk about sourcing wood for a moment. So I get my wood on the side of the road typically. I also have some land that I can take wood from, but a lot of my wood comes from asking people if I can take the wood from their land. Around where I live, there's lots of land, lots of trees. Under the right circumstances, people say yes without it being a big deal. I go to considerable lengths to stockpile exactly the best quality wood, exactly the wood that I want, right? So I'm not just taking whatever I can get my hands on at this point. I am being very picky about what I put the effort into gathering, and I put considerable effort into gathering exactly the right stuff. So if I see, the stuff I'm carving right now is cherry that I saw on the side of the road, and it took me and Dano a couple days to stockpile all this cherry. That being said, it was very efficient to do so. But it was, it was a lot of work. So it wasn't just, I think I'm going to carve a spoon, I'm going to go out to the woods and cut a branch off a tree at this point. That's not, to my mind, going to get you the same results as I can get, because it's just not the same quality of wood. People have said tree surgeons, to some extent firewood. The answer is going to be different for each of us depending on where we live. Sometimes for people, sourcing wood comes down to knowing someone like me who will sell you some blanks. I have relationships with people who are really into spoon carving, and they just live in California or a city, and they set up a subscription with me where I send them regular quantities of blanks at regular intervals, and that for them is setting up the supply of wood so that they can do what they want to do. There's no shame in buying blanks from somebody else. I think for me, spoon carving is not really about going out to the woods that I happen to have and doing the best with what I got. It's about the time spent with the knife expressing myself in a certain way. So I think I'd say the answer is there's lots of different ways of getting good quality wood. So now I'm going to define the back of the handle. Again, this goes to the flow part of things. So you can see I'm just a couple minutes in and I've got the handle pretty well defined here. It's bit more glare than I wish there was. Sorry about that, guys. What can I do about that? If I put it like this, I slide myself over, that'd be better. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay. All right, so let's see. We talked about speed. We talked about workflow. We talked about stretching. We talked about crank. Sharpening was a big one that people wanted to know about, and I just did a live thing where I just did a bunch of sharpening. I did not, it wasn't a teaching sharpening session, it was just me sharpening, but there are also teaching sharpening sessions of mine on YouTube and to some extent IGTV. So you'll also notice at this stage that I'm not trying too hard to get it super clean, right? This is not a super clean shape. What I am trying to do is get a really nice, consistent, thin rim here that's going to be easy to trim up the next time I go around. And so I've got a nice thin rim between here and here. And that's going to make it easy to carve a smooth line all the way around. So I don't think any of this is rocket science, and I think anyone else, you know, there's a certain amount of skill that I'm bringing to bear, but I really think the process is the secret. And if anyone were to exactly duplicate my process, you would be shocked at how much you were able to duplicate my results, because it's not, you know, it's not like I'm exhibiting a huge amount of skill and that's what's making it possible. It's that the process of paying attention to locking certain things in. Yeah, I don't know where you'd buy the right tools in Kosovo. Are you unable to buy from overseas? You know, I think the process is really the secret sauce here. So at this stage, I'm going to redraw with a pencil. And here is where people want to know about achieving symmetry. One of the biggest things I can tell you about achieving symmetry is that it helps to squint your eyes like this. And if you squint your eyes, it kind of makes everything fuzzy, obviously. Thanks, Emmett. And it just makes it easier to see the pencil line, to pay attention to the pencil line that you're drawing and ignore the shape outside the pencil line. Because that's really the trick, is that the more you sort of look at the pencil line and ignore the shape outside, the more you can see whether what you've drawn is symmetrical or not. Notice that I'm definitely sketching it in. I'm not trying to get a perfect smooth line right off the bat. And I'm not using rulers or anything like that. I'm just, you know, when I'm trying to make a nice clean straight line, I'm sliding my hand along my leg like that. But I'm not, again, notice I'm not trying to just do one clean line. I'm going chukka 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 chukka. And in those little marks, you end up with a nice straight line. So again, I think if anyone were to really exactly follow this process, you would be shocked at how close to my spoons you could produce, because it's really the process doing the work here, not me. Similar to how I tried to make the point with these pictures that my daughters are taking on the camera, of how, you know, the camera does the work, not really the photographer, beyond focusing and deciding what to take a picture of in the first place. People really don't want to hear that for some reason. They really like the idea that the photographer has some special talent that they're bringing to play. I'm not sure I believe that. Hey, Graham. You know, I think the special talent lies in other things. You know, it lies in deciding what to take a picture of. It lies in deciding how to articulate things, all of that. But there are some things that, you know, just if you follow the process or have the right tool, it you end up with a certain result. So now that I have redrawn my shape, my neighbor lost a great red oak, took out 2 floors of his house. Good grief. Metal in it, hard to cut up. What they probably meant, Debbie, was it is Debbie, right? I'm getting that right. At some point somebody had like wired some limbs together or stuff, which just meant that it endangered his chainsaw, because any metal that has been in the wood that the tree sort of grew up and around, that's enough to ruin a chain right there. So trees like that, or urban trees or trees that have already had a bunch of tree work on it, old tree work that then gets subsumed by the tree as it grows, are a real pain in the neck to deal with, because they can ruin your saw in an instant. So sorry about your friend's house. Jeez, that's a scary moment. We had some tree work done behind our house specifically to avoid that likelihood. We had a big sugar maple that was leaning towards the house taken down. Okay, so now you can see I make the cuts coming down the handle, but I leave them attached. And I'm going to come up around the shoulders and get underneath where I left those cuts in place there. So let's talk about clean finish at this point. So one of the reasons, I used to carve with a roughing out knife, and then I'd switch to a finishing knife. And I thought that was a good process. I learned it from JoJo Wood. She had a post on her feed about it. And I thought, that's brilliant. I should totally do that. I was struggling with sharpening at the time, and it felt like a good way if I was struggling with sharpening to, so sorry to hear that. I was struggling with sharpening, and keeping one knife that was like going to remain super sharp felt like a good investment, right? But it turns out that if I just get good at sharpening so that my knives are always the right degree of sharpening, it means that it's easier on my body to do all this initial roughing out carving, because it's always easier when you're using a sharp knife. And what it means when you're carving with a sharp knife right from the beginning is that sometimes you can make a cut and then just leave that cut right through to the end, because it's such a clean, good cut that it just stays right through to the end. So those sorts of finishing cuts early on in the process, it's time savings that start to compound as you go along. And it comes from having a knife that's perfectly sharp right from the beginning of the carving process. So I no longer think it's a great idea to have a roughing out knife and a finishing knife. Now, sometimes the grain in the neck is not cooperating. Partly, I'm not sure why it's doing it. Might have to do, kind of feels like it's going too strongly into the grain, like it wants to be cut from the other direction. But then it doesn't necessarily want to be lifted up from that direction either. So, one of the things I'm going to do, having just spent all this time talking about only using one knife, I'm going to pull out the other knife and see if it has better luck. So while I tend to carve with only one knife, sometimes it's worth having a second knife around, just to see if, in particular, if the tip is in better shape on a different knife. See, this one I'm having a little bit better luck, although it still wants to leave that little mark right there. So, I'm going to go from the other direction, and yeah, you can see how in the other direction it's happy to clean up and be nice and pristine. So for whatever reason, it's going perfectly parallel with the grain there in a way that, whew, made it really difficult. So different woods behave different ways, and I don't just mean different species, although that's true, but like even from one piece of wood from the same billet of, the same log, two pieces right next to each other will behave differently in the different parts of the spoons, like particularly in the neck, depending on how they're lined up with the grain, how they're oriented, all that. So you can't just make blanket statements that oh, this behaves like this and this behaves like that, because it doesn't always. And it pays to have extra little tricks up your sleeve, like a backup knife that's freshly sharpened, to be able to clean up those neck areas. Now, sometimes there's still some stuff that you just need to walk away from. But this now looks good. Now, another way to check for symmetry is to hold it up against a bright surface. So in this instance, I'm holding it up against the window coming from right there. And by squinting, I'm able to see very accurately how symmetrical it looks in a way that's harder to do if I'm not holding it up against something like window. Yeah, so that tells me I'm actually in pretty good shape. I had thought I was going to need to take down more on this side because I hadn't gone quite to the pencil line, but when I look at it against the window there, it actually looks to be in good shape, and I actually need to do just a little bit more here. Kim, I thought you were traveling or something. So now I just need to trim the end. See, this is where having flow helps with your speed, is that you don't forget parts of the process. Okay. And now that I've got the shape the way I want it, all dressed up. And now notice how I've kept these sides nice and vertical, and I've also maintained a little bit of extra thickness. That's because once I start pulling the chamfers down, I need that thickness to be able to create a three-dimensional shape within this. If I make these dimensions too thin, either this way or this way, then I limit my options of what ultimate shape I can achieve, and I end up basically being stuck with the rectangle. Oh, nice, cool. Alright, so that's how I check symmetry. It's through squinting and holding it up against the light. And then, if I were going to make a bunch of changes to it, I would take out a pencil and mark those changes, because as soon as you start actually carving the changes, you lose track of where you want it to finish, where you want your line to finish. So now I'm going to carve the top rim again, and this is just my chance to really sort of sweeten up that line and get it the way I want. Now, I have firm opinions about this top rim. I believe that the top rim of a spoon should be basically flat at a slightly different angle from the handle, right? So that when it's flat, the handle then cants up from it a little bit. And it should be flat, but it should have a very slight amount of curvature to it. I don't think it should be totally flat, and I don't think it should have too much curve. If it has too much curve, then there's a bunch of stuff at the tip and at the back that just never hold liquid. But if you don't have any curve, then it feels weird when you pull it out of your mouth. You need a slight amount of curve to get it to feel effortless when it comes out of your mouth. And you also need to be looking at it from this angle to make sure that it looks the way you want it to look from here. One of the important things for me was learning to drop these back shoulders. And I did that by swooping the handle down so that it became more level. Before I dropped these back shoulders, I would have these high shoulders that would look weird, feel weird. I wasn't quite sure how to resolve them. But simply by pulling down to pull these shoulders down lower, I end up with a much more natural looking spoon. So again, my top surface here is clean enough because I'm using a sharp knife that I don't have to redress this surface. It's exactly the way I want it. The only reason I did the rim was because it had those pencil lines on it. That was really it. So now I just need to pull the bottom up a little bit more. And I always start in the middle and the bottom because that's the middle being the deepest part this way. The middle is what defines the line that you see when you look at it from the side. And then, rather than go from the middle out to the edge, I then go from the middle and then I go to the edge. And I make the edge exactly how I want it. And making the edge how I want it, this is a big part of how I get the rim how I want it and how I get the shape, the consistency that I want. Because it means that I'm going to hold this rim thickness exactly how I want. There's not going to be any mistakes, any me getting up tighter to it than I think, because by going right to the rim from the beginning, I then make it so I can blend from the rim to that center and get a nice, whatever curvature is the nice curvature to go from one of those to the other. I'm like ready to do it because I've established the shape I want from this direction and I've established the rim that I want. And now it's just a matter of blending those two together. So blending is the other key bit, doing the rim and then blending. You'll find that I do that both here and on the inside of the bowl as well. Let's talk about that for a second. You see that I haven't touched the bowl at all. Many of you guys have heard me say this a lot. If you wait to do the bowl till the end, you keep your options open. Like, what if it happens that I see a little crack back here? Or I just end up knocking the knife against this and need to reduce this shoulder by just a little bit. If I've already carved the bowl, there's only so much I can adjust. If I've waited to carve the bowl, I can adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust, and I can almost always salvage something from the scenario. So that's why I wait to do the bowl till last. So I'm not going to bother doing much on the back of the bowl here, because with an eater, I'm going to come back and do more on the back of the bowl as one of the very last things I do once I get the inside of the bowl exactly how I want it. And so there's not really a lot of point in me spending a lot of time trying to make something perfect back here because I don't yet know what that's going to be. So instead, I'm going to do the bottom of the handle, get that curvature exactly how I want it. And just like that. Now it might be that I've gotten that shape exactly how I want it and I'm just going to leave it. And again, that's where having a sharp knife makes all the difference. Alright, what else are we talking about? Getting out twist, transition. Sorry, I'm going off this list of stuff that going off this list of stuff to make sure I cover the things that you guys want me to talk about. Okay, we're getting to the point of aesthetics, mouthfeel, thinning out rims, and bowl thickness. Cool. Alright, so at this stage, it looks the way I want it to look from this angle. You just gotta ignore this stuff up here. And it looks nicely symmetrical like this. Has the right twist. It looks the way I want it to look from here. Just a little bit more to do here. And I've done the best I can at getting the neck clean. If you can't get the neck totally clean, this is totally one of those places where you just need to walk away. So now I'm going to just do the facets on the back of the handle and then the top of the handle. For me, there are some spoons where I leave it very square. I'll have a top and a bottom, and then I'll have these facets, and then I'll soften the facets with a micro facet on each side. So that's certainly one option, is to just have it be a rectangle with a facet knocking off each corner, and then I find it's helpful to do a micro facet on each of that facet's corners just to make it so it's not super sharp. But I've also gotten really interested in how it feels to have more of an oval handle. I mean, I've explored all sorts of things on handles. I've explored having this actually be slightly hollowed with the hook knife. Hey, Jeff. And so instead of a micro facet, I just do another smaller facet on either side of that facet. And this is just for this spoon design. There's several others where I do similar, but each of my designs has a slightly different thing going on. Because it wouldn't feel right to do this for a cooking spoon where you want it to be simpler. Or for instance, like my kid spoon I just recently decided is going to basically be a rectangle with softened facets rather than something more complicated like this. Just because there's a simplicity to it that appeals to me. One common mistake is to not pay enough attention to this facet on the side of the handle when you're doing the facets on the top, and you completely dive all the way down through it, and then you end up changing the way it looks from this dimension because you dove so deep that you eliminated that little edge that was keeping this shape looking the way it looks. So you have to pay attention to not extending past the edge there as you go about it. Good. But I do want to get fairly close, so you have to be, it's a balancing act between getting close and not exceeding what that rim you've established will let you do. So, good. And then I do a facet on either side. In this case, on the top, it's a micro facet on the side. The purpose is just to soften that corner. And so the use of these long facets kind of stacked on each other in a pattern allows you to get any sort of shape, whether you want it to be round or more oval. You can create that by sort of stacking these facets one on top of the other in a deliberate way. And you can also, the facets don't have to be the same thickness as they go along. So you can, for instance, end up with a handle tip that remains slightly fatter here because you let the facets get narrower as they reach the end. So these sorts of long facets really are the versatile key to getting whatever shape you want on your spoon. Because they'll just, you can adjust them infinite ways once you have a sense of how they work. And then once you burnish them, it just works. They feel so nice in the hand because what you've created is this faceted organic form. Use a chest plate, use a leather piece with a string. Yeah, I used to try dabbling with those things, and I have found if I'm carving all day, I try and wear that apron, which gives me a little bit of protection, although not much. But I don't know. I found that it was like an extra thing to pay attention to, and honestly, my sternum doesn't get that bruised, so it's just not that big a deal. It's sort of one of those things where if my sternum is getting bruised, it means that I'm either overdoing it in ways where I need to take a break anyways, for my hand's sake, or that I didn't knock off the back corners of the handle. Because what happens is if you leave those super sharp and then you press it into your body, super uncomfortable, which is part of how this curved handle end for me evolved. It was in reaction to wanting to make it more comfortable to press against my chest and then liking the result that created. Okay, so now I've got all my facets. Now it's time to do the spoon bowl. Just gonna quick little pass at this rim for a second here. Get this sweetened up before I carve the bowl. Good. Okay. So I'm going to have another opportunity to carve the top rim partway through the bowl carving process, so you'll see that in just a second. Now, do the bowl here. Now with the bowl, I always start in the middle and stay away from the edge and slowly go out to the edges. I don't try to get right up on that edge right off the bat. It's just not worth it. You'll see that I'm pulling towards my thumb. That both gives me more power, but it also gives me more control. It means that when the knife comes to be done, it's not going to hit my thumb because it's closed up in my fist and can't reach my thumb. Whereas if I didn't have my thumb in place, then when this pops out, it has some momentum and it can go places. Hi, Chuck. So So I'm going to get the rim just a little bit thinner, and then I'm going to re-trim the top of the rim just to change the angle a little bit. Got tied up playing Ticket to Ride. Nice. Alright, so I'm not doing a great job showing you guys exactly what's happening in the bowl, but that's okay, because there's other videos I've done that show that. But check out how I'm sort of easing my way up on the rim. The goal is to sort of get everything all the way around the spoon so that the rim is just a couple millimeters thick, probably about 2, maybe 3 times the thickness of what the final rim is going to be. And then I'm going to do something that's going to really help with consistency in just a second here. So, okay. All right, so good. Now, you can see how the rim is still angled up from this outer edge. It's angled up because there was this hump of material in here. And it just feels better and works better if at this stage, when the rim is quite thin, I come along with the Sloyd and I knock it back so that the rim, instead of angling up from this outer edge, is flat and level from side to side across the spoon here. That's the goal. So when you're doing this, you got to be careful that the back of the blade doesn't catch on the spoon here. So it has to be angled up high enough that the back of the blade doesn't catch. It's a bit of a song and dance sometimes to make sure that that doesn't happen, but totally worth it. So this is also my last chance to sweeten up this line and get it exactly the way I want it. And because of the grain change, part of these cuts are coming down this way. So for this to work, your knife has got to be really sharp. So make sure the tip of that knife is very sharp. And you can see how it just makes, how do I show this? It just makes for a smoother line. It just makes for a better line. I also want this to angle down just a little bit. And as long as I don't exceed that rim thickness, I can adjust the tilt of the bowl essentially within that rim thickness at this stage. Okay, good. Now this side is about doing that same, flattening out the angle and also matching from one side to the other what I'm doing. So I can kind of look across and I can tell whether one side needs to go down in comparison to the other side. So much of spoon carving is just being observant and seeing what is and what needs to happen. And that's true with sharpening, but it's also true at these stages, you know, when you're seeking symmetry, seeking a clean line. It's just about looking, you know. Your eye is as good as mine at seeing it. You gotta take the time to see it. Okay, that looks pretty darn good. Good, good, good. Good. Just a little more here. I'm looking for that rim to be totally clean, no bits of anything on it before I go on. This is something spoon carving with Tom Scandian talks about a bunch. Is his feeling is that if at every stage you just make it as good as you possibly can before you go on, then you more reliably end up with a good spoon. I think he's right. I think it also just takes more time. So my style is much more to sort of know where you can fudge it a little bit. Do I put much of a scoop along the rim from front to back? Is it a swoop? It's pretty level, Chuck. Yeah, it would be. It's pretty level. There is a bit of a curve, but you know, I used to do more of a curve, and now I do less, because really the point of the curve is just to make it feel good in your mouth when you're pulling it out. If you don't have any curve at all, then when you pull the spoon out of your mouth, it lifts up on your lip here and here. Doesn't feel good. Thanks, Nico. But honestly, it's not, you know, that's really all there is to it. So now, again, if you hold it up against a window and squint, you can see if you're remaining symmetrical. I can see that I need to ease down the sides of the handle here just a smidge, just the tiniest little bit. And this is where a sharp knife is going to keep you from getting into a pickle. You want the knife to be able to exit the cut when you're being gentle with just the lightest of pressure. Now, because I have a fairly robust keel to this neck, I can make the neck quite thin, but this is an aesthetics choice. You can certainly make it thinner than I have made it here, and it will still be adequately strong. To my mind, there's a point, though, at which thin becomes too thin. And so for me, it's about finding the right thickness aesthetically, and then having that work out structurally, as in the aesthetic choice needs to also work structurally, but you're not making aesthetic choices based on structure. Okay, a nearby of the neck, please, right? So there's the neck from there, and there's the neck from there. Now this bit back here is going to change, because remember, I'm going to do more on the back of the bowl. And so you can see There's a bit of a tail flip there. So what I'm mimicking here is, sort of your standard kitchen spoon, which has much less of a keel here and pulls up even higher. There's a limit to how much you can do that with wood. So that's kind of what I'm currently exploring. All right, so now, that took longer than it usually takes, but back to the hook knife. And now I'm gonna get the rim exactly the way I want it. Ignore the center of the bowl, get the rim exactly the way I want it. Now this is something that took me a while to realize, but that if I try to have the rim be exactly even all the way around, all it takes is one mistake to screw me up, and then I have to go back and try and sort of shave off a little more all the way around to get it to be even. More often than not, something screws it up again, then you get thinner, and then you get thinner, and then if you go even too far, you'll end up, pursuing a perfectly even rim all the way around to the point where you've screwed up the spoon for the sake of that. Instead, I began to realize that functionally, it's actually quite nice to have the rim here and here be super thin. And I used to actually do what I called rimless spoons, and then I found that they didn't photograph well. You need that tiny little bit of rim to sort of pull your eye to the fact that there is a rim there. So I brought the rim back just a little bit from being rimless, but right there on the sides, it's really comfortable to have it be super thin. But if you were to make it that thin all the way around, well, then the tip is vulnerable. So for those functionality reasons, I started making the rim different thicknesses depending on where on the rim it was. And as I started doing that, I realized that it actually is much faster to do it that way, because it means that if you need to adjust a part of the rim, it isolates it from the rest of the rim. You don't have to then go readjust every single part of the rim. You just sort of fair in the line and make it look sweet again. Make it look sort of average to the other side as well. But that's a lot easier to do than trying to get the rim exactly perfect all the way around, the way a metal spoon is. And not only that, it works better too. So that for me was a big moment, was realizing that I didn't have to get the rim perfect all the way around. I just had to make it what made sense. Now, notice that I only am doing the rim once I have locked in this curvature of the upper rim by doing that bit with the Sloyd knife a few minutes ago. If you do this before you lock that in, you're going to have to go back and forth because you realize, oh, there's a bit of a bump on this rim. Now I got to go back from the top and get that bump away. Oh, now that affected the way it looks from this angle. So not avoiding those kinds of moments when you're going back and forth because you didn't think through your process is one of the most important things in terms of speeding up your process and not getting yourself backed into a corner. If you're not interested in speeding up your process, it's still worth doing it because it keeps you from backing yourself into a corner by accident. Okay, so now that I have the rim the way I want it, now I'm going to blend from the bottom of the bowl to the rim. And I'll often start in the middle again. And I'm paying attention to how thick it is, right? I don't want to go through. And I want to make sure that the middle is actually on the thicker end. Now, this cherry is chattering just a little bit. This piece of wood has been chattering on me a little bit right from the beginning. So partly that, I'm not attributing that to the knives being dull or anything. I'm attributing it to just something about how this spoon is oriented within the blank and the dryness of it, because it was a piece that was lying around for a while. Just making it a bit chattery. So one of the ways I can stop chattering is by easing off on my cut and having my cut be much lighter, and at the same time having my cut be more deliberate, where I'm guiding it with more firmness, but at the same time, so it's firm but shallow. That's a good way to put it. A firm, shallow cut will allow you to get around an area or to cut an area that was previously chattering because you were not being firm enough and trying to go too deep. Or maybe the firmness, I think sometimes when it chatters, it's because you're being really firm and trying to go deep. But when you're being shallow, you still need to be firm. It's not like when you go shallow, you are slacking off and not being firm. That's going to get you into trouble also. So you need that firmness, that precision of, my hands are doing this exact thing, but you need it to be shallow, and that combination is going to get you cutting without chattering where the previous cut it was chattering. When I say lying around for a while, how long? This was probably lying in the greenhouse for half a week, but in a really small piece of wood, so it's pretty dry, I think, which is why it's chattering a little bit. This is nowhere near the moisture content that it would if I had just split the piece out of a larger round. So it's just behaving just a little bit differently, and I'm having to respond to that a little bit differently, but that's okay. As far as moisture content, I couldn't tell you exactly what the moisture content was. Okay, so now I'm going to put it in my mouth to see how the bowl of the spoon feels in my mouth. There is no substitute for actually putting it in your mouth. I know sometimes people feel squeamish about this and like they shouldn't be putting it in their mouth because it's going to go to somebody else, but there's no way of knowing if it feels exactly right without putting it in your mouth. It's a spoon. You can wash it. Yeah, see, as I suspected, I don't want to go any deeper because then it'll start to feel too deep. So, at this stage, you can't really see, but there's still some tool marks. So my goal at this stage is to just try and clean up as many of those tool marks as I can without pushing it any deeper. So this comes back to that sort of firm but shallow. Firm but shallow. And I want to make sure that my curves are nicely blended also. A lot of times, spoons I get from people require one or two more cuts right here in the center front tip. For whatever reason, that doesn't get pushed quite as deep as perhaps it ought on a lot of spoons. Now, people talked about struggling with the connection of the inner rim down into the spoon bowl. And my biggest advice for that is to simply try not to get right up to that inner rim. You've already established the inner rim to be visually the line you want it to be from there. So try to go sort of right up to it, but not recut it, as it were. And then you're blending, right? So you're not trying to go straight down and then dig in too deep. You want it to be a gradual curve in. Just trying to take off the high spots of the tool marks. Yes, correct. Although it has more to do, I'm not really feeling for tool marks, I'm feeling for unevenness in the curve. I'm paying more attention to the curve and less attention to the tool marks. And that's probably an important distinction. Because the tool marks, you're seeing the tool marks, but in the end, the thing you're actually going to notice is the curvature. So a great example is often there's tool marks like right here, right? That's the way it works with a lot of people. And whether or not those tool marks remain, to my mind, is way less important than whether or not you've got a nice sweet curve to the back of the bowl here, or whether you still have a bit on the side sort of haunch here that needed an extra cut or two. And often you'll find that in addressing those scenarios, you magically also handle those tool marks that you were earlier so focused on. So to my mind, always put the emphasis on the form that you're chasing